Our next presenter is Ethan Baptiste. And Ethan is a Salix, Okanagan Nation, and was born and raised in Oliver, British Columbia, Canada, on the Ossos Indian Reserve. He graduated from Notre Dame High School in Wilcox, Saskatchewan, and then attended the University of British Columbia and majored in political science and economics. Thereafter, he attended Concordia University College and majored in business administration. Also, I guess, played a little hockey. And then has gone to Thompson Rivers University and completed his Bachelor of Business Administration with a degree in finance. Currently, Nathan is attending the University of British Columbia and is scheduled to finish a Master of Arts degree in interdisciplinary Indigenous Studies this summer, and then he'll continue on for his doctorate in interdisciplinary studies in September. So let's welcome Ethan.
Wij gastel galt in chai squeezed Ethan Baptiste in Gachin Tianut Achia Ga Soknoken. Good afternoon, my name is Ethan Baptiste. I'm a member of the Okanagan Nation, which is in southern interior of British Columbia. In the program, the title for my presentation was Traditional Governance Replacing a Traditional Dream with a Western Nightmare. And I'd sent in that abstract last year, and after sending it in, I really liked the title, so that's going to be the title of my master's thesis, so I had to change this one. So this is the focus I'll be doing today as well, is on leadership and leadership principles that our current chiefs and councils have adopted, and really trying to determine how far we have moved away from our traditional principles, and without just criticizing, trying to see how we could bring them back to where we were when we were governing ourselves. As well, I'm not really used to PowerPoint or paper. I usually just talk, but trying to juggle back and forth, but one of these are going to get ditched sooner or later. Traditional Okanagan leadership has the 5 principles that I will be looking into is the will of the people, leadership training, protection of the land, leading by example, and continuously validated authority. In terms of traditional Okanagan leadership, there's a lot of concern within our elders about what should be known publicly, what should be included into academics. So I've been instructed to only share things that are published so that we don't offend anyone who has that knowledge, or that even though that knowledge is community held and there's a lot of issues surrounding that. So this is going to be based on what's been published and what's available through books and PowerPoints. This is our 4 food chief story, and it's really the key to this story is that the 4 food chiefs had made bare the head chief because of his age and his wisdom, and they were discussing what to do when the people were coming. And Bear had said, well, I will lay down my body for the people so that they can use it to survive. So really the story is about the willingness of a chief to sacrifice for the survival of their people. All he had was his body, so that's all he could give. And there's other ethnographers, historians, and whatnot that have did studies on our people, and this is some of the quotations that have been done, but the interpretations have come from my elders. I couldn't put the interpretations in there, but these are what I can share. So if you want the interpretations, come see us in the Okanagan and pack some salmon and tan some hides for our elders. But the key to these are, the first one is the will of the people was always followed. And the second one was the training that chiefs had to go through. So really they took office in midlife when their managerial abilities and moral behavior was really well known from the people. To move on, within this one, it's clear that the chiefs didn't think of themselves as above the rest of the people. And as it says in the bottom of the first quote, in times of plenty the chief is wealthy, in times of scarcity the chief was the poorest. And also that moral authority that they exerted had to be continuously validated, and that's something I'll address later. And this last one is based on how leadership was followed, and it wasn't done through coercive measures or any kind of negative threats, or you're not going to get this job, or you're not going to get this or that. It was really, it was just based on their leadership ability. I'm basing this on my own band, which was a really difficult process to do because of how we're going to approach our own internal problems and then let those out publicly. But there are things that we have to be looking into as within our own communities, and that has to come from our own people. So this is the approach I've taken. Our band is one of the most well-known in Canada through economic development. If you Google them, there'll be tons of stories about success within economic development. And there's a quote from our chief, and it was on effective leadership. And succeeding means learning about business. But I remember this one story that I heard from an Indigenous chief from Africa. He was speaking in this DVD, and it was about development and sustainability. And he had said he'd gone to the United Nations. And he was sitting outside the United Nations, and he noticed all these people that were homeless. And he said, well, there's these huge buildings that house books and paper. There's so much books and paper there. There's these buildings that house cars. There's these buildings that house tourists that come to visit, but yet they don't have anything to look after their own people. So the way he looked at it was, what you see in a country is a direct relation to how their leadership is trained and what the level of leadership that exists within that country. So this is kind of the approach I've taken here, is to really look and center on the people and how the people are affected. Because of course we can get all kinds of media portrayals of how our communities are, but we're the only ones that know the real story. Within the will of the people, this is just one of the quotes from our chief, and what's key is the motto of Norway House Cree: if every objection must be overcome, nothing will ever be accomplished. Leadership means developing a critical mass of support, not total agreement. And that's probably one of the biggest problems I've encountered when talking about traditional leadership and traditional governance with our current leadership from all over the Okanagan and even in BC, is that there's no understanding of what Indigenous consensus is and what Western consensus is. they've adopted the Western consensus decision or Western consensus definition of everybody has to vote yes. And really that'll never happen. So they said, well, we can't have consensus. Let's move on. Let's get our critical mass of support. But the problem with that is that Indigenous people understand that you can't have everybody vote yes, but it's more of a process to coming to an understanding of what you have to do. And it's really seeking out the objections to your proposals, because those are the objections you have to be considering, so that you've considered the whole picture, not just, well, we have this much that we need to get the support, instead of looking at everything. And this is done through our traditional process of Anawakin, where it's a decision-making process. And really, your responsibility is to see the views of others. And again, it's just coming to an understanding. You can feel negatively about a proposal that needs to be decided on within the community, but you can understand why it has to be moved forward. And that's really hard within our own democracy systems, where it's just 50+1 is the most that we've ever seen that we need. Within Canada, we have a referendum process whereby 50% of the majority has to come out to vote. So if you don't get that, then you have to have a second one. And all you need is a majority of that majority, but 50 people have to come out. So if you have 50 people within a band of 100, 26 have to say yes. So compound that by 1,000, only 260 out of 1,000. So it's really setting us up to marginalize our own people. And usually the youth are alienated first within democracy, just because they don't have a voice through a vote. So with limited resources of our communities, they often focus on what they need to pass the referendums or pass the development proposals. This is a quote from one of our youth. And it's opposite from within Indigenous decision-making, because they seek out the youth because of their creative energy and innovation, which you need within the whole process. Also with leadership training, there was really stringent leadership training that happened within our communities, but today it's just age restrictions and criminal records checks. There's no training in traditional leadership, business management, or governance in general. And so most of the education that our leaders get is from mentorships of non-native experts or trial and errors. And there's several problems with this. And the first is the validation of such experts' knowledge is never questioned, and that skill is gained through a formal education. Second, non-native experts are limited to only one Eurocentric, mechanistic worldview and theories, such as capitalism, individuality, exponential growth. And these have been instilled through a Western education system which they themselves never question and often uphold and defend. Third, leaders begin to accept that Indigenous knowledge is backward and primitive, and that progress can only be achieved through Western frameworks. Eventually, leadership becomes susceptible to outside experts projecting such Eurocentric ideals or equally complex analysis, especially if that analysis is coupled with complicated graphs, projections, statistics, and complex dialogue, all present to instill apprehension in leadership to not want to appear backward or primitive. And unfortunately, the answer will never be found in what to do in our communities from outside experts, as we've seen from the presentation before, within traditional knowledge, Western knowledge, the differences, the inferences that are made. And there's a quote from Linda Smith that writing can be dangerous because by building on previous texts written about Indigenous peoples, we continue to legitimate views about ourselves which are hostile to us, and that's can be carried on to governance as a whole or business. They all come into our communities with these viewpoints that are at times hostile to our own people, and we have to filter all this information that they're giving to us through traditional mindsets, our own community's knowledge, for it to be beneficial to us. There are some that are doing good work in our communities. I don't want to say all our lawyers and consultants should be kicked out off the res and then we'll move on. There are some, but they have to come with feelings of humility that maybe they don't know everything and that there's still things that need to be known. And this process, which was discussed earlier, is based on a traditional storytelling where the listener and the storyteller are both engaged in a process of learning, so they grow together. And it's not an expert or a non-expert, it's a learner and a listener, and they both are experts and they both can learn, so it's a reciprocal teaching and learning experience. So if there isn't education, formal education, if our leadership can't leave to get university training, at the very least, we have to retrain our people on our traditional values and beliefs. And their priority should be attending cultural events, ceremonies, practice traditional activities on the land, and hold regular counsel with elders. So they have that ability to really decide what's good for our community from our own perspective, to make it truly appropriate. Protection of the land. Yeah, everybody knows our strong connection to the land. And this is from one of our websites, and it's we have a vision of the area becoming an attractive, well-planned industrial park. I don't know about other Indigenous people, but it's hard to see beauty in an industrial park. But I understand the argument that we need an economic base that is independent of any federal money, and that's seen within all of our organizations throughout Canada, that their funding source dictates their direction. The Harvard Project outlines 2 strategies: the jobs and income approach and nation building approach. Jobs and income is really short-sighted because it creates business and tries to get the people to work at the business, where a nation building approach is long-term and it's really building a nation with businesses. The key there is raises the quality of life in the community. This was one of our last referendums where there was promised jobs and jobs and jobs, but there ended up being 12 short-term jobs that lasted 2 months. And it was all based on the preparations. So that's, just to go back, that's one of the things that we have to get away from, is doing developments that are really, the initial workforce is needed in the beginning, and then because it creates this cycle where land is really high turnover. So if you have these jobs that are short term because everybody's constructing a building, once the building's constructed, there's no jobs left. So you have to take more land to fill that void, and that cycle would never end. So what do we need to change? We need to start learning what our traditional societies used to be, so then we can look forward. As our elders have taught us, we have to know the path we have been taking to know how to really benefit. And another thing is defining our own well-being. And I'm sure money and jobs will be there, but they won't be the top. Money's not going to be first on the list. The other ones, just off the top of my head, are language loss, drug and alcohol levels, feelings of safety and access to traditional foods, which is a huge one, which development really affects. There's just a saying from our chief, if your life sucks, it's because you suck. Yeah. Roland Christian there's one of his quotes where it really breaks down that it's not that simple. We can't take that approach with our own people. And we can't simply feed into these racial stereotypes that are portrayed on us, although they're safe, although we could get support from the outside and we'll get published in journals, we'll get acceptance wherever, but we really have to take a different approach if it can't be determined that you have no work ethic, so you're lazy, and it's not that, well, the jobs that are available aren't what I want to be doing, or there's no movement above. So like in our reserve, we have a lot of vineyards, so a lot of the jobs are low paying, working outside, doing menial tasks over and over and over and over, and a lot of our youth don't want to do that. But then instead of looking at the process, the overall picture of what jobs are available, what people are interested, they say, well, you don't want to take that job, so you're lazy. And we have to move away from these. As we've seen before, development was never meant to trickle down. There's a Mexico example. And as anywhere in the world, it's always indigenous people that are affected the most. So we have to make room for those who want to remain indigenous. Because there always will be people that believe the lands are communally held, who believe the land is alive and worth saving. But like I said before, if they're not the 26% needed to pass the referendum, they're marginalized. So we have to include all of our people. And we can't, one of the objectives that have been happening for a long time is get the money and then solve the problems. But how much money do we need before we really start looking at our communities? One of them is treating a band like a business, which really harms the people because it doesn't look at anything collective, it's all financial. The continuously validated authority, the biggest problem there is democracy. Within Canada, it's election time is every 2 years or 3 years, depending on the direction the band wants to take. So then we have our leadership that does whatever they want for 20 months out of the year, 2 months before elections, while everybody gets jobs, everybody gets renovations and whatnot. So it's safety within that set term of office that we have to really reevaluate. This is just within a development. I'll speed it up a bit here. This is another one of our referendum processes where it's a distribution of the package proposal, which is about that thick, a couple information meetings, and then a referendum vote. And the hugest problem is a lot of these packages are written in technical language because it's based on the land development legal language. But a lot of reserve members, the average person doesn't read more than 3 pages and then they get bored and say, I don't want to read this, because a lot of it is based on legal terminology. So this lot in this space, and it's all really vague, and you can't really understand, well, I don't really know where these boundaries are. Can you go by lakes or rivers or something, but it's not. It's all the lot systems. But they have written that way because it's good for the town that's near our reserve. So if it's good for the town, it's got to be good for us, and that's the approach they take. Oh, just a quick mention on the last problem there, that the meetings are run by administration staff and lawyers. So it's not our leadership that stands up and says, this is what we need. This is how we're going to move forward. But it's the staff of the band. And that's one of the hugest problems I see, is because the responsibility should be on the leadership to know what's going on in our community, speak to what's happening. And then we would be able to gauge how somebody is thinking, and that could tailor into the election. So if we're going to have democracy, we have to use it. But I'm not saying we should have a public bickering or anything where everybody just gets up there and screams at each other. I want to do this, I want to do that. There's constructive dialogue that can be based on the Okanagan process, where everybody comes to an agreement. So when they're saying their issues publicly, they can say, well, I don't like this because of this reason, this reason, this reason, but I believe it's the way we have to go, because instead of just allowing someone else to make that decision for us. And it's really within the level of dialogue that we can understand how far our leaders are looking into our own concerns, and those people will be able to really, they'll recognize the negative, so they say, yeah, that's how I felt. And okay, they've discussed it, so I feel a little bit better about this. I think I'm just about at the time, but I wanted to just mention one thing about finances. And this is from our website, or a presentation that was done. It's a PowerPoint slide. And what OCS does to be accountable is demonstrate transparency, show financial statements, and the rest. Well, the financial statements are good, but again, you're burdening people with these documents, and they're not legal terminology. Now they're financial references and technical graphs and whatnot. And simplifications in graphs can be dangerous, because the more simplified your information is, the more vague. Here's one of ours, and I have to use this once before I leave. So there's not really any indication of what these really mean, other than, well, that's nice you're sharing that with us. Because if you look at, well, nobody knows what miscellaneous is. The other issue with showing financial statements is there's no input available. So if we look at post-secondary education, which is just over 3,000, with a band that makes $14 million a year, why are we only doing that? So if you can't have any feedback, well, what's the use? I think it's nice, but if you can't have input into next year's financial expenditures, that's not accountability. Here's the band's definition. Oops. And if you can discover what accountability means after reading that, that's another thing that we have to do. We have to define our terms from the people that are being affected, so they know what accountability is and they understand what it means. And then leadership could take that. And then again, it's the will of the people. I just want to end with, this was quoted in Linda Smith. It's from Franz Fanon. And it's related to intellectuals who have been trained outside without Indigenous knowledge. And there's 3 levels through which Native intellectuals can progress in their journey back over the line. First, there is a phase of proving that intellectuals have been assimilated into the culture of the occupying power. Second comes a period of disturbance and the need for the intellectuals to remember who they are, a time for remembering the past. In the third phase, the intellectuals seek to awaken the people to realign themselves with the people and to produce a revolution in national literature. We're at the third phase in this room, but our communities haven't realized the second phase. They don't understand that maybe lawyers and consultants don't know everything, and we're still allowing them to direct our communities. And until we can reach that third phase, then a lot of these principles within Indigenous governance will be realized, and that's where environment comes in. That's where sustainable development will be approached. Like David Suzuki just finished a tour of Canada, and he said that, and everybody I've talked to, there is never a discussion of, when he says, well, what's wrong with Canada? They never say, I pay too much tax. I want my taxes reduced. It's the environment. It's the children. There's all these other issues that our governments aren't listening to. And we've adopted those within our communities. So it's money and jobs. Well, yeah, they're nice, but I want my kids to be able to play outside without walking into needles or without all these other things, right? I want to be able to go and pick berries. But until we realize this third phase, so I guess it's really an educational process that we're going through. And it's nice to see that there's a lot of other people who are willing to do and take on that responsibility of educating our people. So, Limlimt.
As you see on your programs, we're going to take a little break, and then Dr. Burton will be doing her presentation, and we'll be doing the dialogue. All that scurrying up there that Dale was doing was to remind me to tell you that there's some snacks out here. So, so there's some light refreshments, some snacks, and we're going to take a 15-minute break. And when we return, we'll have Dr. Burton's presentation and then begin our dialogue. So take a stretch.